Thank you. This is Karen Billings. I'm the Vice President of the Education Division here at SIIA, and we have been hosting a series of webinars with APAS Education Group on the Common Core for Publishers. And we've been sort of going through the K-12 system grade by grade, and we've done 3 of them in the past. This is the 4th, and we're going to end up in high school, grades 9 through 12. So just a few comments about SIIA. For those of you, maybe a few of you that don't know who we are a trade association. We work with companies, our members that produce software and digital content. And as an education division, we really work with all of the companies who are developers of software applications, online services, all kinds of related technologies around both K-12 and higher ed. So we've got a number of benefits which you can see there. I don't need to read through them, but one of the things that we have done in the past is a lot of work on intellectual property. Some of you may remember a video years ago called Don't Copy That Floppy, and others maybe the more recent video, which is just Don't Copy That Too. We have several key initiatives I want to make sure that you know about. For companies on the call, we have a survey that is in play now, and it is very specifically for companies that are willing to share some limited revenue information so that we can compile a really good market data report. Also, if you're an EdTech innovator and you have an innovative new product, we've just opened up our last round of the Innovation Incubator program. It allows you to get a lot of support with a lot of the resources that we have. And whether or not you're a company or an educator, we'd love to partner with you to help get our Vision K-20 survey out into the schools. So I think that's about it for us. In the past, we've got a couple of events coming up. For members only, we have our government forum. The theme this year is on mobile learning, and it's excuse me, held right before COSIN in March here in DC. In May in San Francisco, we'll have our annual EdTech Industry Summit. We used to call it the EdTech Industry Summit. Now it's the Education Industry Summit. And it's got a lot of great opportunities for presentations yet and for participation on a lot of different levels. For members who are interested in what's going on down at South by Southwest EDU next week in Austin, you can register for and listen to our next webinar. They're usually for EdMarket 101. They are Thursdays at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. So now what I'd like to do is to turn it over to Betsy, who is here from APAS Educational Group, and have her introduce just a little bit of about APAS and introduce our speakers for today. Betsy?
Thank you, Karen. Very happy to be here this afternoon. Have been really enjoying the partnership between SIIA and APAS Educational Group to bring you some really interesting stuff on where we're going with Common Core. In brief, APAS Educational Group is a custom content development organization. We work with a lot of publication companies and vendors, and we spend a lot of time thinking about how to make Common Core accessible to students through partnerships with publishers. So we're really pleased to be able to help bring this information to all of you today. I'd like to introduce our primary speaker, Carrie Weathers. Carrie holds a bachelor's degree in elementary education, a master's degree in teaching of mathematics, and an Ed.S. in education administration, all from Middle Tennessee State University. She has 13 years classroom teaching experience and was chosen as one of 15 teachers to participate in a program to help schools implement Common Core objectives. She has significant experience developing Common Core lessons and assessments, and she's been doing a fantastic job presenting all the way through from kindergarten through middle school, so she gets to show her stuff for the 9-12 audience today. I'd also like to introduce Stephen Gibson. He has a background in teaching high school social studies on Massachusetts teacher certification, and has been working in content development for about a decade before signing on with APAS Educational Group as our content area development leader in social studies. So welcome Carrie and Steve. And Carrie, I'm going to hand it over to you now.
Okay, thank you. Each time that we have done one of these webinars, we have kind of focused on particular aspects of Common Core and how that relates to publishers. And for the 912, we're going to look at the verb usage, assessing learning, and then the college and career readiness for the areas of 912. The first topic to explore will be how does Common Core standards take high school courses to a new level. The second aspect we're going to look at is how is assessing Common Core different than assessing state standards. And then for the college and career readiness, how is the real-world connection different with Common Core? Looking at our first topic, how does Common Core standards take high school courses to a new level? Just looking through the difference in standards in general, most typical state standards are knowledge-based verbiage when it comes to the wording of their standards. You're going to see things like use, identify, write, perform, solve, find, determine, convert, know, recognize, and select. When we swap over to looking at Common Core standards, we're getting into a much higher DOK level with the depth of knowledge that students are required to have, especially when we get into the high school area. Most of our high school standards, according to Common Core, will be application. As a matter of fact, 5th grade is the last level where reading foundation skills are even addressed. To me, I see Common Core as taking it as, primary years are building that foundation, developing the foundation, more in intermediate years, and then when we get to middle and then especially into high school, it's less about relaying knowledge and more about how to apply the knowledge. So when we look at Common Core high school standards, we're going to have words like explain, understand, interpret, derive, prove, determine, analyze, comprehend. So our depth of knowledge is taken to a newer or to a higher level where students are no longer just required to know information but to apply information. Whenever we're looking at these as being the application years, we are even kind of looking at how a difference in how the courses are designed. As you know, the traditional high school math courses are typically Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and Geometry. Many states have kind of played around with the order of those, in that a lot of times now Algebra 1 is offered in middle school. Sometimes geometry is put in the middle of Algebra 1 and Algebra 2, and they're very distinctly different courses in what students learn within that type of math. Common Core is kind of taking the high school math to a different level in that there's kind of integrating math where there's no longer just an Algebra 1 or geometry, where students are seeing a connection across the different domains of math there. So a lot of systems and states and districts are going to the integrated math where it's a combination of algebra and geometry. Students don't have to solely work in algebra or solely work in geometry within one course. So thinking about how those differences with Common Core really will affect publishers, more rigor, of course, going to have to take the text into more rigorous, higher level activities, complex text when it comes to the English language arts. many more math tasks with application and less just knowledge and algorithms on how to solve. More taking that knowledge that you learned middle school previous years and how does it apply to real life situations. I think also publishers are going to have to look at individual districts and states more now, especially with the math, in that I know within my state, not all districts are following integrated or not all districts are following traditional. So I think you're going to have to offer, both the traditional with keeping Algebra 1 separate, Algebra 2 separate, Geometry separate, and then also look at the flip side on offering texts that meet the integrated method that some of the districts are following with the Common Core. Also, looking at Common Core high school with the ELA, there are specific texts that students would be addressing as far as the literature goes. There are many book studies and things suggested in there on what literature students should be reading at the 9-12 level. And so publishers are going to have to be very careful to make sure that they're incorporating activities and questioning and texts that are being pulled at that complex level. Looking at our second topic, how is assessing Common Core state standards different than assessing state standards? Application takes assessment to a new level. No longer can the students just be assessed solely on the right or wrong answer. Teachers are very quick-minded, trained with state standards to just look through and grade tests or grade papers based on did the student get the correct answer or incorrect answer. And when you take it to an application level, the assessment has to change. When we're looking at many of the Common Core standards, students are being asked to write arguments to support claims, as being seen in the first one, and that one was the ELA, to cite strong and thorough textual evidence, that was in the ELA, explain each step in solving a simple equation, and write or construct a viable argument. These are not easy things to assess just looking through and, oh, yes, the student got the correct answer or not. These are not designed to be selected response questions. So I think teachers are going to need a lot more support on how to assess students on these standards and on the grading process. So thinking about as how will a publisher meet the needs of teachers hitting at this higher application level, I think the main thing that a publisher can do is with the rubrics. Students, right or wrong answer on some of those, it's did you produce a viable argument? Can you justify your thoughts? Even if the teacher doesn't agree with the standpoint or the opinion of the student, the idea here is for the student to use textual evidence to support their comments or support their reasoning or support their thinking. And teachers are just not designed or not trained, I think, to assess in that way. So I think teachers are going to need a lot more support with grading rubrics. And I think it's going to be very important that publishers include rubrics in with their resources to help support teachers in grading those types of standards or assessing those types of standards. I think teachers are going to need support in what does a correct answer look like, and teachers and students both are going to need examples of student answers. And a lot of times teacher resources are really good about including exemplary work of students and showing what a good answer would look like, but I think it's also important for publishers to take into consideration that on the flip side of that, we also need to be looking at what is poor quality work from a student and kind of then letting teachers see what kind of things are missing from poor quality work and what kind of things are included in high quality work. So as a teacher, I think lots of support with rubrics and assessing application level standards and lots of examples of student work as far as what is a viable argument and what is considered textual evidence and what students should be, what level they should be thinking at to actually hit these standards. And the third topic to look at today is how is the real-world connection different with Common Core state standards. And I know all of you have probably heard ACT, putting out the report that most students are not prepared for college when they leave high school or not prepared for the workplace. And all of my research has led me back to 912 with Common Core as being an attempt to answer the question, when am I ever going to use this? And I think at this level, by adding all of the application standards, that Common Core is really striving to let students see the connection between their knowledge and application either in the workforce or at the college level. So I think high school is the time when the student will be seeing the connection between, okay, my education years and all of the knowledge that I've learned, this is the time when I'm going to see, when am I really going to use it? How is it really going to affect my life? And they're learning to apply their knowledge either for their future educational career in college or in the workforce. As a publisher, thinking about that, it's going to be very important for publishers to use real-world situations, regardless of whether it be math or science or social studies or ELA, to make sure that there is a connection there, even if it's just a word problem, to make sure that students are seeing how that's being used in some real-world situation that they may be presented with later in life. Lots of tasks more than students just working out 30 solving inequalities in math or choosing the most vibrant adjectives in a text. There need to be real-world tasks where showing, in the workforce or in life, how would this apply? How would you actually be using this in the real world? And applying it in a variety of careers, showing, that math can occur in lots of different career choices, not directing everything, toward math and accounting, or literature to an author, or just science to a biologist. I think publishers being very creative and displaying how the knowledge is applying to lots of different fields of study and careers will be very important in hitting that real-world connection. When looking, let's jump back to our very first slide, at the different topics for the 912 area, Common Core, again, is taking that 912 level of understanding up to the application and the DOKs to a higher level. Again, we have got to expect more and demand more and have higher expectations for students. And textbooks have a lot of control over the rigor that's happening in the classroom. With the assessment of learning, no longer when we go full force, Common Core will just typical knowledge questions hit those standards. There's no way to assess, can a student create a viable argument or use text evidence without hitting a higher level. And teachers, again, are going to need support with the rubrics and examples of student work, exactly what should we be looking for from students. And again, with the college and career readiness, putting as many real-life examples out there as possible and relating those to as many different domains as possible. And for our 9-12 section, those are the 3 topics for today, and if Steve would like to have a comment at this time.
Thank you. Well, I was asked to discuss the Common Core as it relates to subject matter outside of ELA and mathematics, and specifically speaking to social studies and science and the other technical subjects. So I'd like to begin just by reiterating some of the things that Carrie had mentioned. First, that the standards beginning at grade 6 level, they're augmented by a parallel set of standards which change in degree relative to the complexities of the subjects being discussed. Levels generally at grades 6 and 8 provide fairly broad standards, while when we get into high school, those standards generally provide additional specificity. For example, when we are talking about integration of knowledges and ideas, in middle school we might integrate visual information such as charts or graphs in combination with print and digital texts. By the time we get to high school, we start using qualitative analysis with those charts and data. By the time we reach grades 11 and 12, we might be discussing the qualitative analysis in order to address a real-world problem or solve a question. So those scaffold nicely as they develop through those grades. The subjects that I'm discussing, history, geography, some of the physical sciences, these are disciplines that are really built on developing critical thinking skills. So Carrie's mentioning of developing justifiable arguments to support assessments really hits home here. And to that end, the development of rubrics is going to be essential as those assessments are developed. What I'd like to do now is just briefly discuss some different ways that we can incorporate some of the Common Core for these various subjects. Again, we're speaking outside of ELA and math. We're speaking to social studies and science. Some different strategies to incorporate these standards into students' curriculum. First and foremost, probably the most obvious, is to incorporate the usage of primary sources into instruction and assessment. There are various ways of doing that. There are primary texts, historical texts, for example, and secondary examples would be, say, such as biographies, things like that. But by inserting these sources into social studies and science study, we're developing the reading Common Core standards. And again, those develop incrementally as the grade levels proceed from 9 to 12. Now, as we do this, of course, we're getting to our second strategy is that some of the language and text are increasingly difficult. So as that applies to, say, publishers, it'll be incumbent upon you and us to develop these into bite-sized chunks that are accessible to students. It's development of passages, for example. It's much easier to assess a paragraph-sized passage than to have a student read War and Peace, obviously. So the way to develop these information is going to have writers develop these passages who understand the key ideas and information that are located within these primary texts. And developing that one step further, it's going to be important for us to understand that information and background knowledge to text is critical. Therefore, in order to do that, we need to have students understand the themes and the big ideas between the events and ideas that we're working with. For example, it would be great to have students understand the connections between the loyalties that are at play during the American Revolution or during the Civil War. How did those loyalty affect choices and behavior in those situations? Those ideas will help students make that transference of information much easier for them. as we relate, this relates to Common Core standards, we're getting from some of the reading standards into the writing standards. The Common Core allows us to highlight writing to these informational texts by giving students the opportunity to respond in constructive responses or extended responses or even essay responses. Again, to piggyback on what Carrie was saying, to assess these will require the use of rubrics, and the development of those can't be understated. But there's many different formats to make that easier on a student within a classroom environment, and that we could use online message boards or blogs to bring technology into it. And it makes the meaning of the content that much closer to home. Finally, the use of text-based answers in assessments is probably the most salient point I have to discuss. It gives students the opportunity to actually argue their beliefs and developing those critical thinking skills that we were speaking about. Giving the students the text from which to work gives them the opportunity, it gives them the fodder to develop their arguments and therefore to develop those critical thinking skills that are going to be essential for college and career track. There's nothing like having factual information to back up your argument. One of the things I like to reiterate is that confidence is often developed through demonstrated ability, and there's nothing that boosts that than having an argument that you can justify by pointing to text and knowing that you've constructed an argument from alpha to omega, and there it is in print. So another way that this can be developed is through the usage of performance tasks. Performance tasks are used quite often in the social sciences, government, geography, history, things like that, because they're a little bit more, they coincide better with some of the subject matter being discussed. For example, I just recently developed a performance task using technology to highlight civics-related principles. Now, for something like this, a teacher would assign different news stories to students using technology, and the students would follow each other and develop arguments and do some research. And at the end of the performance task, we're looking at a written report where the students sum up all this information that they've gleaned and learned and interacted with, and on a number of different levels. And you might ask, well, what are the Common Core standards in here? But at the very basis of this, there's two. We're integrating information from diverse sources, both primary and secondary, into a coherent understanding of an idea or event. And the second one is that we're writing arguments focused on discipline-specific content. So in summation, I mean, there's lots of different ways that these Common Core standards for social studies and the sciences can be applied, and are obviously quite useful in translating to real-world critical thinking skills. And I want to thank you for your time and attention this afternoon. So.
And thank you to both. This is Karen, and there is a question that has popped up in the chat box for both either Stephen or for Carrie. Perhaps you could address the concern that Mary Elizabeth brings up. She said, as a reading clinician, I disagree that 5th grade should be the last level where reading foundation skills are addressed because complex text prevent previously unseen challenges to students. So would either of you or both of you, one after the other, like to address that?
I would. I completely agree that the complex text being introduced by Common Core will definitely present many challenges to students. I think that until we really get into the meat and the heart and several years into Common Core, that most definitely grades 6 through 12 are going to need lots of support in reading foundations. skills, lots of support in basic math foundation skills. I think that is just even a greater reality to us, that our expectations and our rigor hasn't been at the level that it needs to be. I know I've been working with a lot of districts that started introducing Common Core gradually. It started in kindergarten, went full Common Core, and now they are up through second grade full Common Core. The only grade levels, 6, 12, or 3, 12, are still working with any state standards. So I think I hear teachers all of the time talking about the difference. The first year that anything changes over, it is very stressful, and teachers are seeing lots of gaps. I think in order for us to hit at that, 5th grade being the last level where we have to address those foundation skills, is going to take time. I think, 5 years down the road, when we have these children that started kindergarten in Common Core, they've moved from first, they've moved, to second, all the way up to 5th, I truly feel like they will have a good grasp on their reading foundation skills, and they will be able to easily address the complex text. But I completely agree that until we have conditioned our children and we have started with the rigor in kindergarten, and the rigor has followed them up through 5th grade, that we will have to give a lot of support to all students, especially our older students who are not conditioned into the rigor, into the thinking, into the complex text. So I definitely see, even with my own personal children, a difference in the thinking of my student who has been exposed much more to Common Core than my older child who hasn't. My 3rd grader now thinks nothing of writing out his thoughts. He thinks nothing, of writing in math and of addressing complex, picking out text evidence, where my older child has a much more difficult time because that's just not the way that she's accustomed to doing things. In younger primary grades, she just wasn't conditioned that way. So it will definitely be a concern, I think, until we get to the point where it's a norm.
Well, thank you, Carrie. Stephen, did you have anything to add? She did give a pretty complete answer.
I would agree, but I'd just like to, again, piggyback on perhaps what she was saying by, stating that some of these more complex texts become more integrated into the subject matter as grades develop. I mean, certainly there are reading strategies that you can implement in the social studies core area of history where you're dealing with much more complex primary texts in, say, grades 8, 9, 10 than would ever have been would be possible for a 4th or 5th grader. Yeah. But I think Carrie pretty much nailed it. So I think I just wanted to add that little bit about the primary texts and primary sources with respect to social studies.
Okay, great. Any other questions? We had one good one, and I think a good response. But if there are no others, then I guess we will simply close the webinar. And thank you all for joining today.
Yes,
yes,
Mary had a response on there. I have not had a chance to read it fully, but she did have a response that I'm not sure if it will need addressing or not.
Yeah, it does say that, but what about the text elements that they haven't even seen by 5th grade, things like allusions, rhetorical figures, sophisticated figurative language, and they sort of need to understand those as reading and writing strategies.
I'm not exactly sure on that. Those kinds of things are not exactly what I think of when I think of reading foundational skills. I'm thinking more when we see in our standards with the reading foundational skills, it being more things about phoneme awareness and looking at words and letters and context clues and how things all fit together with comprehension and kind of more on the basics than actually figurative language and things of that. I think those things are all still definitely addressed in 612. I think when Common Core is addressing reading foundation skills, it's more like phonemes and letter sounds and putting things together with blending words and actually the meat of just reading.
Okay. Stephen, anything?
No, I think I'm fine with that.
Okay. All right. Well, I would like to again say thank you to everybody who was on the call. We have recorded it, as you know, and it will be then available. What happens is that the ReadyTalk system that we use will merge the audio with the slides, and then we will send that to us as an archive, and then we will be posting that on our website. So stay tuned. Lindsay or I, or with the help of Betsy, etc., will get these out to you. So appreciate that very much. And thank you again, both Betsy and Carrie and Stephen, for participating today. And thank you to all of our attendees. Bye-bye.
Have great afternoons, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Please stand by.